It is day 207 of Israel at war, and the nation and much of the world is now anxiously awaiting to see if Hamas will respond positively to the latest proposal that would bring home some of the 133 hostages held in Gaza, as well as bringing a temporary ceasefire in the fighting there. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged that even if a deal does go through, the IDF will complete its mission of wiping out the last Hamas stronghold in Rafah. This as his far-right ministers threaten to bolt the government if he does not follow through on that. Elsewhere, the international repercussions of the conflict are being felt from the halls of the International Criminal Court in The Hague to New York's Columbia University and other U.S. college campuses to Arab capitals throughout the region. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osron, first off, has more on the prospects for a hostage deal and the possible ramifications.
Gaza ceasefire or a Rafah operation now? That's the dilemma Israel's prime minister is currently facing amid reports of a potential breakthrough in negotiations with Hamas. But in a meeting with representatives of bereaved families and relatives of hostages on Tuesday, Netanyahu said the IDF will operate in Rafah with or without a ceasefire deal.
We will enter Rafah because we have no other choice. We will destroy the Hamas battalions there. We will complete all the objectives of the war, including bringing back all of our hostages.
The statement comes as mediators seem hopeful an agreement is within reach, including the top U.S. diplomat who is visiting the region.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
The Hamas leadership outside Gaza has reportedly received an answer from the leaders inside the Strip to the current proposal. It reportedly includes an Israeli commitment to allow the return of displaced Gazans to the north of the Strip and a more significant withdrawal of IDF forces from Gaza, both previously rejected by Israel. This would come in exchange for a 6-week ceasefire and the release of roughly 35 Israeli hostages. But senior Hamas officials are already placing responsibility on Israel.
I don't believe the ball is in Hamas's court because we've explained and made our positions clear to the mediators and all the sides involved. It's clear the ball is in Israel's court.
Hamas's response is expected on Wednesday, according to Saudi media. Until then, Tuesday's war cabinet meeting was called off, as well as sending a delegation to Cairo, as Israel further prepares to enter Rafah.
And both Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who boycotted today's meeting of the cabinet, and the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir have said they will oppose a hostage deal and are threatening to bolt the government if it means putting off an offensive into Rafah. Here's Minister Ben-Gvir today.
I finished the meeting with the Prime Minister at my request. I warned the Prime Minister, if you don't enter Rafah, God forbid, we end the war, God forbid, there will be a terrible deal. The Prime Minister promised that Israel will enter Rafah and will not end the war, and promised that there would be no terrible deal.
And Minister and War Cabinet Observer member Gadi Eisenkot, who lost a son in the Gaza conflict, shot back at Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, accusing them of, quote, blackmailing the government with political threats. Here's more on that from our correspondent Balir Sladin, who was earlier at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv.
Yes, as we can see, there's a verbal fight, if we can call it this way, between some of the members of the war cabinet and the wider cabinet. Now, Smotrich is responding to Eisenkot after Eisenkot said Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are blackmailing, as he said, Netanyahu with political pressure. And Smotrich is saying right now that he needs to be modest because he belongs to the conception camp, as he is stating it. Now, we've seen today that Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir met, and Netanyahu assured Ben-Gvir, according to what Ben-Gvir has said after the meeting, that there will be an operation in Rafah. There won't be an irresponsible deal, as Ben-Gvir, has said. And also Netanyahu assured the same thing to some of the families of the hostages and the other forum that gathers the fallen soldiers. He told them that there will be an operation in Rafah and there wouldn't be a deal with Hamas that would actually release or free lots of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. We actually had been in a press conference here in the hostages square to the Tikva forum, to some of the families of the hostages, that shows that there is a disagreement also inside the families of the hostages. Not all of them agree with each other, and we had a talk with a father
administration to somehow find a solution that involves widening Israel's diplomatic window in the region.
Well, I think the widening Israel's diplomatic reach in the region goes through the streets, not necessarily of Washington, the White House, but of Riyadh. And until we see more significant movement in that avenue, and we have heard in recent days some statements that there is positive momentum in that field of the normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But again, Saudi Arabia has made it clear time and time again, even before the war, but even more so since it began, that any advancement regarding recognizing Israel or relations with Israel has to go through what the Saudis have said, a viable path for a Palestinian state.
Right.
And nothing has changed.
No, but the point being that things
Israel
could be changed dramatically if the hostage, that could set off a whole chain of events. I mean, we may be getting ahead of ourselves here, but that's how much is at stake here. Even just, of course, most importantly, the hostages, but it could set off a whole chain of events going forward.
Yeah.
There's nothing new about a terror attack in Jerusalem, but there was something new about the identity of the assailant who tried to stab 2 Border Patrol officers today in the capital's Old City before being shot dead by one of them. The attacker was a Turkish citizen named Hasan Skalanin, who entered the country just yesterday from Jordan via the Allenby Bridge. Now, one officer suffered light to moderate wounds. Ariel, I want to bring this up because it's a very typical attack in Jerusalem, but a Turkish citizen just entered the country, maybe a somewhat of an ominous sign there.
Yeah, that's if the Israeli security establishment says that it's challenging to deal with the lone wolf, so when the lone wolf comes from abroad, it's even, as a tourist, it's even harder to identify. I do think it says something about the incitement coming out from Turkish President Erdogan since the start of the war, pretty much calling on Muslims all over the world to join the Palestinian cause. And if you add that to the incitement coming from the Palestinian terror groups, then you find this kind of joint interests, and that unfortunately lead to instances like that. I think for Israel, first of all, there needs to be they need to ask the question: can this be prevented? Could this have been alerted? Could they have known about this individual in advance? But at the end of the day, I think it's another one of those situations where the constant incitement from terror groups, from political leaders, Erdogan of Turkey, one of them, that it leads to real violence on the streets. Words have meaning.
And we certainly saw that today. Well, let's turn focus now to The Hague, where Israel and the U.S. are trying to delay a potential ruling by the International Criminal Court targeting Israel's leadership for fighting back against Gaza's terrorists. Ariel Levin-Waldman takes a closer look at what the charges are about and the potential implications if the court moves ahead on them.
Israeli and U.S. officials are reportedly worried that the International Criminal Court could issue arrest warrants for top leadership over the war in Gaza. It's a potential verdict that Western leaders argue is not even within the remit of the court.
So we've been really clear about the ICC investigation. We do not support it. We don't believe that they have the jurisdiction, and I'm just going to leave it there for now.
A verdict could potentially target Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and others.
If this indeed will happen, it will be an indelible stain on all of humanity. It would be an unprecedented anti-Semitic hate crime, a crime that would add fuel to the anti-Semitic incitement that is already raging in the world.
The ICC investigation alleges that Israel is intentionally starving the population of war-torn Gaza as it pursues Hamas terrorists. Israel denies the starvation claim, pointing out that the number of aid trucks entering Gaza has risen from approximately 70 per day before the war to well over 250 daily now. Israeli spokesmen also say that there are well-documented cases of Hamas stealing the humanitarian aid to sell at inflated prices. But Israel is not a member of the ICC, so what is the risk?
It means that any country that is a party to the Rome Statute, and that's most European states, undertakes to arrest the person if there's an arrest warrant that has been issued.
An unnamed official cited by Bloomberg also noted that should the ICC warrants be issued, Israel could back away from an emerging deal to pause the fighting for 40 days in exchange for the release of 33 hostages held by Hamas. And there's also the threat to legitimacy. Should Israeli leaders be branded war criminals, many European nations would be forced by their own laws to cut arms exports, despite making up only a tiny fragment of Israel's total. It also risks turning Israel into a diplomatic pariah.
And on the humanitarian issue, we should note today, photos were released showing the new pier that was recently constructed under U.S. supervision that is going to be bringing in more aid into the Gaza Strip. I thought we had some photos of that. I want to focus. There is another important diplomatic visitor today in Jerusalem. That is the French Foreign Minister, Stéphane Séjourné, who's here primarily to discuss the Lebanon issue. He earlier visited Beirut in Saudi Arabia, today meeting Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz and other top officials to end that cross-border fire with Lebanon that continued today across the northern front. Let's go up to the northern Israel. And our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek. And Nicole, the French Foreign Minister looking for a solution. Today, again, though, we see just a familiar pattern of that firing back and forth across the border.
Certainly. Well, the French foreign minister might be meeting with his Israeli counterpart, Israel Katz, to try and find some sort of a diplomatic solution. Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed terror group, who has been constantly firing towards northern Israel since October 8th, when they decided to get involved in this war. Hezbollah continues to say that they will continue to fire until a ceasefire in Gaza is on the table, and they halt the hostilities there as well. And so while we are seeing these politicians work to try and see some sort of a diplomatic deal on the table, Hezbollah doesn't seem to want to engage in any of those sort of deals. And so today, Hebrew media is reporting that Israel Katz told Stéphane Séjourné that if Hezbollah does not retreat and move back from the northern border with Israel, we are approaching an all-out war, according to Katz. And if that does happen, then we are not going to see just these continued cross-border attacks really focused on the border, but Israel will continue to attack Hezbollah wherever they might be all throughout Lebanon, likely going further and further and deeper into Lebanese territory, with Katz also reportedly saying that if this does go into an all-out war on the northern front, then Israeli troops will occupy some of the southern part of the Lebanese territory,